Unhook his meter. He doesn't need to know how much we're taking.
That's what the HOA president told her husband while he crawled under my propane station at 3 in the morning and installed a bypass valve around my metering equipment. 500 gallons, gone in 1 month. $1,700 worth of fuel siphoned from a system my father built in 1981 to keep this mountain warm. She smiled at me the next day and said my meter was probably broken. Old equipment, she said, time to upgrade. Meanwhile, she was charging her neighbors $4.50 a gallon for propane she was buying from me at $2.80 and pocketing the difference. Every winter. For 5 years. She didn't know I had cameras. She didn't know my 16-year-old daughter had already found every dollar in her books. And she didn't know that every pipe, every valve, every gallon running under 60 mansions belonged to me. I didn't call the sheriff first. I bought a $12 padlock. Tell me, what would you do? Let me take you back to the mountain so you understand what she thought she could get away with. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina, the kind of place where the nearest gas station is a 20-minute drive, and the nearest neighbor used to be a 15-minute walk. The house is a cabin my father built in 1979 from white oak. He felled and milled himself. 3 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a porch that looks east toward the sunrise. It's nothing fancy, but it's ours. Next to the cabin sits the reason 60 families on this mountain have heat, a propane distribution station, a 10,000-gallon storage tank painted white, a metering station with industrial-grade flow meters, and 9 miles of galvanized steel pipe running underground to every home in the area. My father, Vernon Thorne, built it in 1981 because there was no natural gas pipeline up here, and there never would be. Up on this mountain, propane isn't a convenience, it's survival. I'm a certified LP gas technician, 30 years in the industry before I came home to run the station full-time. I can smell a leak at 40 parts per million. I can hear a regulator failing from across a yard. And I can read a flow meter the way a doctor reads a pulse. Any change, any fluctuation, and I know something's wrong. My wife Donna was the one who kept the books. She was better with numbers than anyone I'd ever met. And she ran the billing side of the operation like a Swiss watch. She died 3 years ago. Lung cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. The oncologist said it was aggressive. Donna said it was rude. She would have laughed at that if she'd had the breath. After Donna passed, our daughter Cora took over the books. 16 years old, a junior at the county high school, and sharp enough to spot a decimal error from across the kitchen table. She wanted to study accounting. Donna would have loved that. For 40 years, the station served every home on this ridge. Farmers, retirees, young families, anybody who needed heat. Then 5 years ago, a developer named Garrison Pike bought 200 acres of timber on the south slope and built Ridgeview Point. 60 luxury homes, price tags from $800,000 to $2 million, heated floors, gas fireplaces, chef's kitchens with 6-burner ranges. Every BTU came through my pipes. Pike signed a supply contract with me before the first foundation was poured. Simple terms, I'd supply propane through an underground distribution system connected to my station. The HOA would pay per gallon based on my master meter reading, and they'd cover an annual maintenance fee for the pipe network. When Pike sold his interest and moved on, the HOA assumed the contract. Standard assignment clause. Nothing changed on paper, but everything changed in practice. Vivian Lockhart became HOA president in year 2, blonde, a sharp platinum bob that moved like a helmet when she turned her head. Heavyset, always wearing cashmere and leather boots that probably cost more than my truck payment. She drove a white Mercedes GLS and parked it sideways in her driveway like the lines were a suggestion. Her husband, Wade, was a CPA, quiet, precise, the kind of man who wore reading glasses on a chain and never raised his voice. He managed the HOA's finances. Between the two of them, they ran Ridgeview Point the way some people run a family business, tightly, quietly, and with both hands in the register. The first complaint came 6 months after Vivian took over. She called my cell on a Tuesday evening and told me my propane prices were highway robbery. I explained the cost structure, transport up the mountain, equipment maintenance, seasonal market adjustments. She cut me off. "We're your biggest customer, Mr. Thorne. Maybe you should remember that before you price yourself out of a contract." I leaned against the tank and watched the sun drop behind the ridge. The air smelled like cold metal and oak smoke from Earl Stanton's chimney a quarter-mile east. The pressure gauge read steady. The system was running exactly the way my father designed it. "Ma'am," I said, "propane doesn't get cheaper because you don't like the number." She hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. Cora found it first. She was sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday night in December, cross-referencing the monthly delivery logs with the HOA's payment records. Donna had taught her how to do the reconciliation, match every gallon pumped against every dollar received, flag any discrepancy over 2%. It was the kind of work that required patience and a calculator, and Cora had both. "Dad," she didn't look up from the laptop. "We pumped 3,200 gallons to Ridgeview last month. They paid for 2,700. I set down my coffee. "Say that again. 500 gallons. Gone. The meter reads 3,200 out. Their invoice says 2,700 received. That's $1,850 we didn't get paid for." I pulled on my boots and jacket and walked out to the metering station. It was 11 degrees outside. The tank glowed white under the security light, and the pressure gauge read normal. The main distribution valve hummed the way it always does. A low vibration you feel in your fingertips when you touch the pipe. Everything looked right, until I got on my knees and looked under the meter housing. Someone had installed a bypass line, a 12-inch section of 3/4-inch copper tubing running around the flow meter and reconnecting to the main distribution pipe on the downstream side. The fittings were brass compression, clean, professional grade. The bypass valve was a quarter-turn ball valve, and it was open. Propane was flowing through the bypass and into the distribution system without passing through the meter. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. This wasn't a hack job with duct tape and garden hose. This was installed by a trained hand. I sat on my heels in the cold and stared at that copper tube. The mercaptan smell was stronger here, that rotten egg odor they add to propane so you can detect a leak. One of the compression fittings was weeping slightly, just enough to put the scent in the air. My father had taught me to follow that smell, the way a bloodhound follows a trail. It always leads you to the problem. I went inside and pulled up the security camera footage. I'd installed 4 cameras 2 years ago after someone stole a set of pipe wrenches from the station. The cameras were basic, motion-activated, night vision, 30-day rolling storage. I started scrubbing backward from the current date. 2 weeks back, 3:15 in the morning, 2 figures on the screen. The first was a man in dark coveralls with a headlamp, carrying a pipe cutter and a torch bag. He moved with the easy confidence of a tradesman, someone who'd done this kind of work before. The second man held a flashlight and stood watch while the first cut into the line, sweated the fittings, and installed the bypass in 22 minutes. When they finished, the second man leaned down and inspected the work. His face passed directly under the security light. Wade Lockhart, Vivian's husband, the HOA treasurer. Checking the bypass his hired plumber had just installed on my equipment, on my property, in the middle of the night. I saved the footage to a thumb drive and locked it in the fireproof safe in the basement, the same safe where I kept Donna's wedding ring and the original supply contract. The next morning, I called Vivian. I kept my voice level. "Mrs. Lockhart, my meter shows a 500-gallon discrepancy last month between what left my station and what your HOA reported receiving. I'd like to discuss it." There was a pause. Then she laughed, a short, brittle sound like a cracker snapping. "Mr. Thorne, your meter is old. It's probably reading high. Maybe it's time to upgrade your equipment instead of blaming your customers. My meter was calibrated 6 months ago by a certified state inspector. It reads exactly right. Well, I'm not paying for gas we didn't use. If you have a problem with your equipment, that's your problem." She hung up. And that was the moment I understood something that changed the way I handled everything that came next. Vivian didn't ask what might have caused the discrepancy. She didn't ask if there was a leak. She didn't suggest we check the system together. She went straight to denial and blame. She wasn't surprised. She already knew. I walked back out to the metering station, knelt down, and looked at the bypass valve one more time. The copper was still bright, new enough that it hadn't oxidized. The mercaptan smell was still there, faint and sour in the cold air. I took 3 photographs, stood up, and went inside to sharpen a pencil. I sent the invoice the following Monday, 500 gallons at $3.70 per gallon, $1,850, payable within 30 days. I included a copy of the calibration certificate from the state inspector's office, dated 6 months prior. No mention of the bypass, no mention of the cameras. just a bill and the paperwork to back it up. Vivian's response arrived 4 days later. Not a check, a violation notice. It came on Ridgeview Point HOA letterhead, heavy paper, embossed seal, printed in a font that was trying very hard to look like it came from a law firm. The notice informed me that my property was in violation of the Ridgeview Point community aesthetic standards. Specifically, my cabin's exterior paint was deteriorated beyond acceptable limits. My roof required immediate replacement to prevent visual blight. And my propane station constituted an industrial facility incompatible with the residential character of the community. The fine was $500 per day, beginning in 30 days if the violations were not corrected. I read the notice at my kitchen table while Cora ate cereal across from me. She watched my face, waiting. I folded the paper, set it down, and took a sip of coffee. They're fining us for the cabin and the station. Dad, we're not even in their HOA. No, we're not. She was right, of course. My property, the cabin, the station, and the 15 acres it sat on, had been in the Thorne family since 1974. It was not part of Ridgeview Point. It was not subject to their CC and Rs. It was not within their jurisdiction in any legal, contractual, or geographical sense. Vivian Lockhart had about as much authority over my cabin as she had over the weather. I wrote a one-paragraph response, citing the county tax records, the property deed, and the HOA's own plat map, which clearly showed my parcel outside the subdivision boundary. I mailed it certified. 2 weeks later, a White County truck pulled up my access road. A zoning enforcement officer named Dale Purcell stepped out, clipboard in hand, and told me he'd received a complaint that my propane station was operating as a commercial facility in a residentially zoned area. Someone, he wouldn't say who, but we both knew, had filed a formal zoning challenge. I led Dale to the station and showed him the wall where I kept my permits framed behind plexiglass. Commercial LP gas distribution permit, issued 1981, renewed annually. State Fire Marshal inspection. Certificate, current. Department of Agriculture, weights and measures calibration seal on every meter. EPA compliance record for the storage tank. Everything up to date, everything legal, everything in order. Dale took photographs, made notes, and shook my head. Mr. Thorne, your operation is grandfathered, permitted, and inspected more regularly than most restaurants in this county. There's nothing here. On his way back to the truck, he paused and turned around. Between you and me, this is the third complaint we've gotten from that subdivision in 2 years, all from the same address, everyone unfounded. He drove away. I stood in the driveway and watched his taillights disappear down the mountain road. The air smelled like wet oak leaves and wood smoke from Earl Stanton's place. It was getting colder. 3 complaints in 2 years. Vivian hadn't just started fighting me when I sent the invoice. She'd been trying to shut down my station for 2 years before the bypass was ever installed. The invoice wasn't the cause, it was the excuse. She wanted the station gone, or better yet, she wanted it under her control. Because as long as I owned the propane supply, she couldn't mark it up without someone eventually noticing. I called Earl Stanton that evening. Earl was 74, a cattle farmer who lived on the next ridge over, and the oldest customer on my books. His father and mine had been friends since before either of us was born. Earl had been buying propane from the Thorne station since the day it opened. Earl, has Vivian Lockhart ever talked to you about your propane? There was a long silence. Then Earl cleared his throat. She came by last spring, told me I should switch to a modern provider, said your prices were too high and your equipment was outdated. I told her my equipment works fine, and my provider built this mountain's heating system with his own hands. She didn't like that much. What did she say? She said, "Things change, Mr. Stanton. People who don't adapt get left behind." Then she drove off in that white Mercedes like she was late for a coronation. I thanked Earl and hung up. Cora was doing homework at the kitchen table. The fire was crackling in the stone fireplace. The propane regulator on the outside wall was hissing softly. A steady, healthy sound, like the house breathing. Everything was working. For now. Vivian called the special meeting for the first Thursday in January. The email went out to all 60 homeowners with the subject line, "Emergency session, fuel supply independence." She wanted to replace me. The meeting was held in the Ridgeview Community Room, a cedar-paneled space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley. The room was warm. My propane was making it warm. About 45 homeowners showed up, which was the biggest turnout anyone could remember. Vivian stood at the front podium, wearing a cream cashmere turtleneck and pearl earrings. Wade sat beside her with a laptop and a stack of printed spreadsheets. Behind them, a projector displayed a slide that read, "Securing Our Energy Future." "As many of you know," Vivian began, "our community depends entirely on a single private supplier for its propane. One man, one aging facility, one point of failure. That's not independence. That's vulnerability." She said vulnerability 3 times. She said independence 4 times. She never said my name. Wade took over with what he called a market comparison analysis. He'd put together a spreadsheet showing propane prices from 4 regional suppliers alongside my rate. According to his numbers, I was charging 40% above market average. The room murmured. A few homeowners looked genuinely concerned. There was just one problem. Wade's numbers were fiction. He'd compared my delivered price, which included transport up a mountain road, infrastructure maintenance, and 24-hour emergency service, to the posted bulk rate from flat ground distributors who wouldn't even quote a mountain delivery. It was like comparing the price of a pizza delivery to the cost of flour at a warehouse store. The numbers looked damning on a slide. They meant nothing in reality. Vivian moved to phase 2. She'd invited a representative from Blue Ridge Energy Corporation, a regional propane company, to present an alternative plan. The rep was a salesman in a sport coat who clearly hadn't been briefed on the logistics. He talked about bulk pricing and corporate reliability until someone in the audience asked the obvious question. "Can you use the existing pipe system?" The rep glanced at Vivian. "We'd need to install our own distribution infrastructure, new tanks, new lines, new meters. What would that cost?" Preliminary estimate, $1.2 million. The room went quiet. $1.2 million, because the pipes in the ground, every inch of them, belonged to me. The rep couldn't use my system without my consent, and I hadn't been asked. Vivian pivoted fast. "We have another option. The board has voted to extend a purchase offer to the current supplier for the complete acquisition of the propane facility and distribution system." She put the number on the screen. $50,000. For a station my father built, a 10,000-gallon tank, 9 miles of underground piping, and 43 years of continuous operation. $50,000 for an asset worth over $400,000 on the open market. I was sitting in the back row. I hadn't said a word. Cora sat beside me, her laptop open on her knees, recording everything through the built-in microphone. When the purchase offer hit the screen, she turned and looked at me. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. The vote passed 4-1 on the board. Arthur Pittman, the only board member Vivian hadn't personally recruited, voted no and said, for the record, "I'd like to see an independent appraisal before we offer a man $50,000 for something worth 10 times that." Vivian thanked him for his input. After the meeting, I walked toward the exit. Vivian intercepted me in the hallway, her heels clicking on the tile, her smile firmly in place. "I hope you'll consider the offer, Mr. Thorne. It's a fair resolution for everyone." I looked at her. The fluorescent lights hummed. Warm air pushed through the vent above us. Warm air from my propane, through my pipes, heating a building where she was trying to buy my livelihood for pocket change. "I'll think about it," I said, and I walked out into the cold. Behind me, I heard Earl Stanton's voice from the back row, loud enough for the whole room. "Independence? Lady, his family's been keeping this mountain warm since before your subdivision was a sketch on a napkin." Nobody answered him, but in the 4th row, Tessa Greer, staff reporter for the Blue Ridge Herald and resident of Unit 22, closed her notebook and looked at Wade's spreadsheet one more time. Then she took out her phone and photographed it. The numbers didn't add up, and Tessa Greer was the kind of person who needed them to. Cora cracked it wide open on a Tuesday night. She'd been going through the HOA's billing records for 2 weeks, pulling invoices I'd sent, cross-referencing them with the HOA's published fee schedule, and comparing both against the actual amounts charged to individual homeowners. She did this the way Donna would have done it, methodically, quietly, with a yellow highlighter and a legal pad. The first thing she found was the markup. The HOA was purchasing propane from me at $2.80 per gallon. They were billing residents $4.50 per gallon. The difference, $1.70 per gallon, was not going into the HOA operating fund, the reserve account, or any line item in the annual budget. Cora checked every published financial report Ridgeview Point had ever produced. The markup revenue appeared nowhere. She did the math on her laptop while I stood behind her, watching the numbers add up on the screen. Average monthly consumption across 60 homes, 4,000 gallons. Markup per gallon, $1.70. Monthly skim, $6,800. Annual total, $81,600. Over 5 years, $408,000. $408,000 taken from 60 families, deposited into an account that wasn't the HOA's. Cora found it, a joint personal checking account at a regional bank, held in the names of Wade and Vivian Lockhart. Dad. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. They've been stealing from everyone, not just us, from all of them. But that wasn't all. I went back to the meter data. If Cora could find the billing fraud, I could find the timeline of the physical theft. I pulled 14 months of flow records from the station's data logger, a digital unit that recorded hourly flow rates and stored them on an SD card. The discrepancy between metered output and reported consumption didn't start 1 month ago. It started 14 months ago, October of the previous year. That was the same month Wade told me he needed to inspect the metering station for insurance purposes. I'd let him in. He'd brought a plumber. I hadn't watched them the whole time. 14 months of bypass operation, 6,200 gallons of the propane stolen, $17,360 at contract price. Then I checked the maintenance fees. The supply contract, Section 7.1, Exhibit B, required the HOA to pay an annual maintenance fee of $12,500 for upkeep of the underground distribution system. I pulled my accounts receivable going back 5 years. They had never paid it. Not once. 5 years at $12,500 was $62,500 in unpaid maintenance. And finally, I read Section 9.2. In the event of theft, tampering, or unauthorized modification of metering or distribution equipment, provider may suspend all fuel deliveries upon 48 hours written notice to the association. I'd signed that contract 12 years ago and never thought twice about that clause. It was boilerplate, a standard protection for the supplier. The kind of thing you include because your lawyer says to, not because you ever expect to use it. Cora printed the last spreadsheet and laid it on the table. The printer hummed. The ink smelled sharp and fresh. The numbers were all there, highlighted, annotated, totaled. She looked up at me, the laptop screen reflecting in her glasses. Everything, Dad. The theft, the markup, the unpaid maintenance. It's over $140,000 they owe us. And $400,000 they stole from their neighbors. I sat down across from her and stared at the stack of paper. My daughter had done in 2 weeks what a forensic auditor would have charged $10,000 to uncover. Donna had taught her well. I called Lyle Kendrick the next morning. Lyle was an energy and contract attorney in Asheville, 41 years old, former utility regulator, now in private practice specializing in fuel supply disputes and HOA infrastructure cases. He wasn't famous. He was effective. The kind of lawyer who reads footnotes and remembers them in depositions. I drove to Asheville on a Wednesday. 2 hours through the mountains, the truck's heater fighting the cold the whole way. Lyle's office was in a brick building near Pack Square. Warm, cluttered, the kind of place where every surface was covered in case files and the coffee was always fresh. I laid it all out. The bypass valve, the camera footage, Cora's spreadsheets, the unpaid maintenance fees, the markup scheme, the billing discrepancy going back 14 months, and Section 9.2. Lyle read the contract twice, then leaned back and pinched the bridge of his nose. Everett, this isn't a billing dispute. This is organized theft. Wade Lockhart installed a bypass to steal your fuel, inflated the price to steal from his neighbors, and didn't pay you a maintenance fee he contractually owes. You've got him on 3 separate fronts. Criminal, civil, and contractual. What do I do with Section 9.2? You use it. They tampered with your metering equipment. That's a documented breach. You have the right to suspend all deliveries upon 48 hours written notice. It's in the contract. A judge will enforce it. We built the plan in 2 hours. Step 1. File a criminal complaint with the county sheriff for felony larceny. Propane theft exceeding $1,000 plus tampering with fuel distribution equipment, both chargeable under North Carolina general statutes. Step 2. Send a formal demand to the HOA for $79,860, $62,500 in unpaid maintenance, and $17,360 in stolen propane. Step 3. Serve the 48-hour suspension notice under Section 9.2. Step 4. Notify the state LP gas division that the metering system had been tampered with, triggering a mandatory inspection. But before any letter was sent, I had one thing to do first. I drove back to Summit Ridge that evening and spent the next 3 days making deliveries, not propane, heaters. I bought 800-gallon portable propane tanks from a wholesale supplier in Morganton. I loaded them into my truck 2 at a time. They weigh about 400 pounds full, and the steel was cold enough to burn your hands through gloves. I delivered them to 8 homes in Ridgeview Point. Earl Stanton, the Campbells in Unit 9, retired couple, both over 80 on fixed income. The Delgado family in Unit 31, 2 kids under 5. The Whitakers in Unit 44. He was a disabled veteran on oxygen. The Renshaws, the Fords, the Beckers. Every family in that neighborhood I knew to be vulnerable. Elderly, young children, medical needs, tight budgets. I hooked up portable regulators, connected radiant heaters, checked every fitting for leaks, and left my cell number on each kitchen counter. When the gas stops, I told each of them, "You call me. You'll stay warm." Earl stood on his porch watching me mount the regulator to his portable tank. His hands were stuffed in his coat pockets, his breath clouding in the cold. "You're really going to shut it down?" "They stole from me, Earl. They stole from you too. They've been charging you 60% more than what they pay me, and they haven't paid for maintenance on the pipes under your house in 5 years. Earl's jaw tightened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Donna would have said you're being too nice giving them 48 hours. Cora already told me the same thing. The last thing I did was check the weather. I'd been tracking an Arctic front building over the Great Lakes for a week. The National Weather Service was forecasting sustained temperatures of -5 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 consecutive days, starting Friday morning. Wind chill to -20, the kind of cold that freezes pipes and walls, cracks radiator coils, and turns every heated home into a race between the furnace and the physics of ice. I timed the notice so the 48-hour window would expire at 6 a.m. Friday, the first morning of the cold snap. Vivian would have 2 full days to pay, negotiate, or comply. If she did nothing, and I knew she would do nothing, because people who steal don't believe in consequences until the consequences arrive, then 60 mansions would lose their fuel supply at the worst possible moment. I sealed the letter, addressed it, and set it on the kitchen table next to Cora's highlighted spreadsheets and a $12 Abloy padlock still in its packaging. The 48-hour notice went out on a Wednesday morning, certified mail, hand delivery to the HOA office, and email to every board member with red receipts. Lyle had drafted it with the precision of a scalpel, 4 pages. The letter cited the bypass valve, the metered discrepancy, the tampering with fuel distribution equipment, the unpaid maintenance fees, and Section 9.2 of the supply contract. It stated in language clear enough for a high school student to understand that if the HOA did not pay all outstanding obligations and restore the metering system to its original configuration within 48 hours, I would exercise my contractual right to suspend all propane deliveries to the subdivision. Vivian read it at 9:40 a.m. I know because I got an email delivery receipt at 9:38, and at 9:41 my phone rang with the Ridgeview HOA office number. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. Vivian's message was 11 seconds long. "Mr. Thorne, this is Vivian Lockhart. You've made a very serious mistake. Call me back." I didn't call back. At 10:15, Wade called. I didn't answer that one either. His voicemail was longer. 32 seconds of measured CPA calm threatening. He said the word litigation twice and injunction 3 times. He said I would be held liable for any damage to Ridgeview property resulting from a service interruption. He said I was playing with fire. A propane man being told he's playing with fire. That was almost funny. At noon, Wade filed for an emergency temporary restraining order with the county superior court. He drove to the courthouse himself. I found out later from Lyle, who had a contact in the clerk's office. Judge Annette Rawlings reviewed the filing that afternoon. The hearing was at 2 o'clock the next day. I sat on one side of the courtroom with Lyle. Wade sat on the other side with a 3-ring binder and the stiff posture of a man who had never been the defendant before and didn't know how it felt to be the one explaining himself. Lyle presented the supply contract, the lien on maintenance fees, the state calibration certificate for my meter, the photographs of the bypass valve, and a declaration from a certified LP gas inspector confirming that the bypass constituted unauthorized tampering with commercial fuel distribution equipment. Wade argued that the propane supply was essential community infrastructure and that shutting it off would constitute reckless endangerment. Judge Rawlings asked one question. Mr. Lockhart, can you explain why a bypass valve was installed around Mr. Thorne's metering equipment? Wade opened his binder. He flipped through tabs. His fingers were steady, but his neck was turning red above his collar. Your Honor, that was a maintenance modification authorized by the HOA board. Was Mr. Thorne, the equipment owner, notified? We believed the modification was within our operational authority. Mr. Lockhart, the equipment is Mr. Thorne's private property. Modifying it without his consent isn't maintenance. It's tampering. And I noticed the modification happened to route fuel around the only device that measures how much your association was using. She paused. I'm denying the restraining order. This court will not compel a private supplier to continue delivering fuel to a customer that has been tampering with his metering equipment. Wade called Vivian from the courthouse steps. I was 10 feet away walking to my truck. I heard every word. The judge said no, Viv. She called it tampering. That's absurd. He's one man with a gas tank. We have 60 families. She doesn't care. The contract is clear. He owns the equipment. We breached it. There was a pause. Then Vivian's voice higher now, tighter. Offer to pay the $18.50, the 1 month, if he drops the notice. Wade covered the phone and looked at me. Vivian wants to know if you'd accept payment for the 1 month discrepancy and withdraw the suspension. I stopped walking. The theft goes back 14 months, Wade, 6,200 gallons. And you owe 5 years of maintenance on top of it. This conversation needed to happen a long time ago. I got in my truck and drove home. The dashboard clock read 3:22, 40 hours and 38 minutes left on the notice. The sky was flat gray, the kind of sky that means snow is coming. The Weather Service had confirmed the Arctic front, -5 starting Friday morning, lasting through Sunday. The coldest weekend Western North Carolina had seen in 7 years. I parked next to the propane tank and sat there for a moment with the engine idling. The gauge on the tank read 82%, full enough to keep a mountain warm all winter, or empty enough to prove a point. With 24 hours left on the notice, Vivian went into full emergency mode. She called 4 propane companies. The first, Blue Ridge Energy, the same outfit that had quoted $1.2 million at the meeting, said they couldn't install new infrastructure in 24 hours. The second said they could deliver portable tanks, but they'd need 60 of them at a setup cost of $3,000 per unit, $180,000 up front. The HOA didn't have that kind of cash. The third company said they'd need a signed access agreement from the underground pipe owner before they could connect to any existing infrastructure. I was the pipe owner. Nobody called me. The fourth company asked Vivian who currently owned the fuel supply system. When she said the HOA, the dispatcher asked for documentation. Vivian couldn't produce any. The call ended. By 10 o'clock that night, Vivian had exhausted every professional option. No company would touch my system without my consent. No company could build a new one in time. And no company was willing to assume liability for connecting to infrastructure they didn't own. So Wade decided to solve the problem himself. Again. I was in the living room at 1:15 in the morning, reading with Boiler, the wood stove crackling beside me, and Cora asleep upstairs, when my phone buzzed with the camera alert. I opened the app and watched Wade Lockhart climb over the chain link fence around the metering station. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, carrying a pipe wrench in one hand and a headlamp strapped to his forehead. He went straight for the main distribution valve, the one that controlled all flow from my tank into the underground pipe network. His plan was obvious. If he could lock that valve in the open position or remove the handle entirely, I wouldn't be able to shut off the supply when the notice expired. But I'd already thought of that. 3 days earlier, I'd replaced the standard valve handle with a tamper-proof locking mechanism, a keyed valve operator that required a proprietary hex key to turn. I carried the only key on my belt. Without it, the valve was a steel fixture bolted to a steel pipe. You could hit it with a sledgehammer and the propane would still flow, or not flow. exactly as I'd said it. Wade grabbed the valve assembly and pulled. Nothing moved. He tried the wrench. The wrench slipped off the smooth housing. He tried again, harder, leaning his weight into it. The wrench slipped again, and his knuckles cracked against the pipe. I heard him swear through the camera microphone, a sharp, frustrated sound that echoed off the tank. I called Deputy Cheryl Bowman. She arrived in 12 minutes. Her cruiser came up the mountain road with the lights on, but no siren. The quiet kind of arrival that means the dispatcher already knows this isn't a noise complaint. Deputy Bowman found Wade standing next to the distribution valve with the wrench in his hand, his headlamp still on, and a look on his face that I recognized from 30 years in the gas business. It was the look of a man who just realized he was in a room he couldn't talk his way out of. Criminal trespass, attempted tampering with fuel distribution equipment, a felony under North Carolina General Statutes Section 14-151, which covers interference with gas, electric, and communication systems. Possession of burglary tools. Bowman read the charges while Wade stood handcuffed in the gravel, his breath coming out in clouds, the security light casting his shadow long and thin across the snow. Vivian arrived in the Mercedes 19 minutes later. She was wearing a bathrobe under a down jacket, her platinum bob pressed flat on one side from the pillow. She stood at the edge of the driveway and watched the deputy put her husband in the patrol car. She didn't cry, she didn't argue. She just stood there with her arms crossed, her face unreadable, while the cold turned her cheeks red and the engine idled. Tessa Greer heard about it by morning. She lived 4 houses from the station, and one of her neighbors had seen the cruiser lights. By 8 a.m., Tessa was pulling HOA financial records through a public information request under North Carolina's Planned Community Act. By noon, she had what she needed: 5 years of propane invoices from me, 5 years of billing statements to homeowners, and not a single financial audit on file. The numbers told the story before anyone opened their mouth. Wade and Vivian had been charging residents $4.50 for propane they bought at $2.80. Every cent of the markup went into their personal account. $408,000 over 5 years. Tessa didn't publish yet. She wanted the meeting first. The 48 hours expired at 6 a.m. on a Friday. I walked out to the station in the dark. The temperature gauge on the tank housing read -3. The sky was black, starless, the kind of cold sky that presses down on you like a lid. My boots crunched through a crust of ice that had formed over the snow overnight. Boiler stayed inside, curled up on the heat vent. I stood in front of the main distribution valve and took the abloy padlock out of my jacket pocket. $12, hardened steel shackle, weatherproof brass cylinder. I'd bought it at the hardware store in Morganton the same day I bought the portable tanks for Earl and the others. I slipped the lock through the valve handle, pressed it shut, and turned the key. 1 click. That was all it took. One $12 lock, and 60 mansions on the mountain were cut off from their only heat source. I pocketed the key, walked back to the cabin, and poured a cup of coffee. The calls started at 7:30. By 9, the furnaces in the nearest homes had burned through the propane left in their individual regulator lines and shut down. By noon, indoor temperatures were dropping through 50 degrees. By 3 o'clock, the thermostats in most homes read mid-30s. By nightfall, with the outside temperature at -5, the first pipes froze. The sound carries on a cold mountain. If you stand on my porch and listen, you can hear it. A faint percussive crack from inside a wall, followed by a hiss, then the dripping that means water is going where it shouldn't. 12 homes reported burst pipes by Saturday morning. Flooded basements, buckled hardwood, cracked tile. A home on the upper ridge lost a radiant floor system that had been operating continuously for 4 years. Every tube in the slab split when the temperature dropped below freezing. Estimated damage across the subdivision, $890,000. Vivian called an emergency meeting for 5 o'clock Saturday. The community room was useless, no heat, so she booked the volunteer fire station at the base of the mountain. The room had a wood stove and a generator. It was the only heated public space within 10 miles. 180 people showed up. Some drove, some walked. Most were wearing every layer they owned. Their breath hung in the air inside the station. The anger in that room was a physical thing. You could feel it in the way people stood, the way they gripped their folded arms, the way they looked at the podium where Vivian was trying to call the meeting to order. This situation was caused by Mr. Thorne's reckless decision to, "Oh." She got that far. Then the room exploded. Not applause, not organized chanting. Just 180 people discovering at the same time that they were done listening. When the noise subsided, I stood up. Fourth row, flannel shirt, work boots, the same clothes I wore every day. Cora sat beside me with her laptop open and a thumb drive ready. I spoke for 9 minutes. I showed them the supply contract. I showed them Section 9.2. I showed them the bypass valve, photographs, camera footage, Wade's face clearly visible under the security light at 3:15 in the morning. I showed them 14 months of metered data, proving 6,200 gallons of stolen propane. I showed them 5 years of unpaid maintenance invoices. I showed them the judge's ruling denying the restraining order. Then Cora stood up. She was 16 years old, standing in front of 180 adults in a fire station without heat, and her voice didn't shake. She connected her laptop to the projector and put the spreadsheets on the screen. For the past 5 years, she said, the HOA has been buying propane from my father at $2.80 per gallon. They've been billing you $4.50. The difference, $1.70 per gallon, has been deposited into a personal bank account belonging to Wade and Vivian Lockhart. Not the HOA reserve fund, not the operating account. Their personal checking account. The total over 5 years is $408,000. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things, not the silence of shock, the silence of understanding. 180 people doing the same math at the same time and arriving at the same number. Deputy Bowman stepped forward from the back wall. She had 2 warrants, Wade Lockhart, felony larceny, tampering with fuel distribution equipment, criminal trespass, embezzlement. Vivian Lockhart, embezzlement and fraud. The handcuffs went on in front of every person they'd stolen from. The removal vote was called from the floor, 174 to 2. Vivian's book club had shrunk. I walked to the front of the room. The wood stove crackled behind me. The projector still showed Cora's spreadsheet. I leaned toward the microphone. I'll unlock the valve tonight, but from now on, you'll see every invoice, every gallon, every cent, and you'll know exactly what you're paying for. I drove back to the station that night, unlocked the abloy with the key from my belt, and opened the main valve. The steel turned smooth under my hand. The pressure gauge climbed. Somewhere underground, propane began moving through 9 miles of galvanized pipe, flowing back into regulators and pilot lights and furnace burners that had been cold for 36 hours. By midnight, the first homes were warming up. By morning, the mountain was breathing again. The new HOA board was elected the following week. Arthur Pittman, the only board member who'd voted against the purchase offer, became president. His first act was to sign a new supply contract with me, 10-year term, $2.80 per gallon, adjusted annually for market rate. Maintenance fees paid quarterly, meters sealed and inspected every 3 months by a state-certified technician. No bypass, no markup, no personal accounts. The civil suit settled in March. $62,500 in unpaid maintenance, $17,360 in stolen propane, $45,000 in damages for the bypass installation, the trespass, and the attempted tampering. Total, $124,860. The HOA's insurance company paid it within 6 weeks. Their risk assessment team sent me a letter afterward, the politest version of, "We never want to hear about this account again," I've ever read. The 12 families with burst pipes filed separately, not against me, but against Vivian and Wade personally. $890,000 in property damage, traceable directly to the fraudulent operation that triggered the shutdown. The Lockhart's personal insurance denied coverage for intentional acts. They sold their house at Ridgeview Point, the one with the heated floors and the chef's kitchen, to cover the first round of settlements. Last I heard, they were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Hickory. Wade was indicted on 4 counts: felony larceny, tampering with fuel distribution equipment, criminal trespass, and embezzlement. He accepted a plea deal, 30 months, state prison. Vivian was indicted on 2, embezzlement and fraud. She received 24 months of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent injunction barring her from serving on any HOA board in the state of North Carolina. I used part of the settlement to start the Thorn Mountain Fuel Assistance Fund. Every winter, the fund provides free propane deliveries, heating system inspections, and emergency repairs to elderly residents and low-income families in the county. The first year, we served 45 households. Earl Stanton volunteered as the delivery coordinator. 74 years old, bad hip, still stronger than most men half his age. He drove the truck himself until Cora told him his route sheets were getting sloppy. He let her take over the logistics. Cora got accepted to the accounting program at Appalachian State the following spring. Full scholarship. She told the admissions panel she'd gained her experience doing forensic auditing for a small propane company. They didn't ask for details. Tessa Greer published her story 3 days after the meeting. Front page of the Blue Ridge Herald. The headline read, HOA, Officers Charged After 5-Year Fuel Markup Scheme. The article ran with photographs of the bypass valve, the padlock, and Cora's spreadsheet projected on the fire station wall. It was picked up by the Asheville paper, then the Raleigh paper, then the AP wire. For about 2 weeks, a 16-year-old girl with a laptop and a highlighter was the most famous accountant in western North Carolina. Earl came by on a Sunday afternoon, a month after the dust settled. We sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the afternoon light hit the propane tank. White steel against green mountain, the pressure gauge reading steady, the system running the way my father designed it. Earl pulled a mason jar of moonshine from his coat pocket. The good stuff, oak barrel aged, clear as water, strong enough to strip paint. He poured 2 cups. We clinked them together. Your daddy built this mountain's backbone, Everett. Donna would be damn proud. She'd say I gave them 48 hours too many. Earl laughed hard enough to spill his moonshine on the porch rail. Cora came to the door, looked at us, shook her head, and went back inside to finish her homework. The fire in the stone fireplace crackled behind her. The regulator on the outside wall hissed softly. The mountain was warm. If you've got an HOA nightmare of your own, put it in the comments below. I read everyone. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because next time, the HOA president didn't just steal fuel. She cut down a veteran's memorial oak on the 4th of July. And she did it on camera. I'll see you there.
So here's the thing about Vivian Lockhart. She has everything working in her favor. She has her husband installing hardware. She has a board that rubber stamp everything she wanted. She has 60 families who trusted their billing statements, and she had 5 years of silence proving that nobody was watching. But somebody was. A 16-year-old girl with a highlighter, a legal pad, and a mother who taught her that numbers don't lie. Vivian downfall wasn't the padlock. It wasn't the cameras. It wasn't even the contract clause. It was the assumption that nobody would bother to check. That the quiet man with the old tank on the hill would just keep pumping and never look at the numbers. Everett didn't win because he was angry. He won because he was patient. He documented everything. He protected the vulnerable. And he let his daughter stand up and deliver the truth in front of every person Vivian has stolen from. If your HOA vote has ever made you feel powerless, put your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because next time, the HOA president cut down a veteran's memorial oak on the 4th of July. And she did it on cameras. I'll see you there.